At my niece's birthday party, my own parents and sister held down my 10-year-old daughter and chopped off her beautiful natural hair. They did it simply so she would not outshine her cousin. My mother looked at the mess they made, looked at my sobbing child, and told me not to make a scene. I did not make a scene. Instead, I smiled, took my daughter, and meticulously dismantled their privileged lives. By the next day, they were crying in a police station. Before I tell you exactly how I ruined them, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe if you agree that a mother's wrath is the most dangerous force on earth. The afternoon started like any other suffocating family gathering at my sister Tasha and her husband Kevin's massive estate. The sun was shining, catered food was laid out by the pool, and I was doing my best to play the role of the polite and quiet sister. I am 32 years old, a crisis management director for major brands, and I spend my days putting out massive corporate fires. But navigating my toxic family has always been the one crisis I tried to avoid for the sake of peace. My daughter Zuri was the only reason I even showed up. Zuri is a bright, beautiful 10-year-old girl who carries herself with absolute joy. She is especially proud of her hair, a thick, gorgeous crown of natural coils that we spend hours maintaining, moisturizing, and styling. It is a massive part of her identity and confidence. I was standing near the patio doors holding a glass of iced tea and listening to my mother brag to some guests when the sound hit me. It was a piercing, terrified scream echoing from the second floor of the house. It was a sound that instantly activated every protective maternal instinct in my body. The glass slipped from my hand, shattering across the pristine tile, but I was already running. My heart hammered against my ribs as I took the grand staircase 2 steps at a time. The screaming grew louder, more frantic, and I recognized my baby's voice crying out and begging for help. I sprinted down the long carpeted hallway toward the master guest bathroom. The heavy oak door was shut. I grabbed the handle and twisted, but it resisted. Someone was on the other side, throwing their body weight against the wood to keep me out. Zuri shrieked my name from inside. I stepped back and threw my entire shoulder into the door with a desperate adrenaline-fueled force. The door banged open, knocking back the person hiding behind it. It was my father, Marcus. The man who was supposed to be a protector, a grandfather, staggered back against the wall. He had been the one holding the door shut to keep me away from my child. But the true nightmare was unfolding right by the double vanity mirrors. My mother, Brenda, a woman who cared more about country club appearances than her own flesh and blood, was leaning over the counter. Her hands were gripping Zuri's small wrists, pinning my struggling, sobbing daughter down against the cold marble countertop. And then there was Tasha, my older sister, the golden child of the family. She stood over Zuri, wielding a pair of heavy, sharp craft scissors. The floor around them was already covered in dark, beautiful coils of hair. Tasha was not just cutting, she was hacking. Her face was twisted into an ugly, resentful sneer as she ruthlessly chopped away at Zuri's thick, natural hair, leaving jagged, humiliating patches incredibly close to the scalp. Zuri was thrashing her face red and slick with tears, screaming for her aunt to stop and begging her grandmother to let her go. The sheer cruelty of the scene froze the breath in my lungs. These were the people who shared our blood. These were the people who were supposed to love and uplift a young black girl, to teach her to love her natural beauty and feel safe in her own skin. Instead, they were violently stripping it away out of pure, venomous jealousy. Tasha had always hated that Zuri possessed a radiant, effortless confidence that her own daughter lacked. Tasha was completely obsessed with making sure her child was always the center of attention, the prettiest, the most celebrated in any room. But to physically hold down a child and violate her like this went beyond petty sibling rivalry. It was a calculated assault. The sheer malice radiating from my own parents as they physically assisted my sister in breaking my daughter's spirit was a betrayal so profound it fundamentally shifted something inside my soul forever. My mother finally released her grip on Zuri's wrists. She let out an exasperated sigh and dusted off her expensive designer blouse as if she had just finished a mild, slightly annoying household chore. She looked down at my devastated daughter, then looked up at me without a single ounce of remorse on her face. Do not look at me like that, Nia. She snapped, her voice dripping with annoyed condescension. Do not make a scene. Her hair is simply too much. It is too big, and it is too beautiful. It made Chloe cry all morning because she felt plain in comparison. Your sister just trimmed it down so Chloe could feel special on her own birthday. It is just hair. It grows back. We had to make it fair. Fair? My mother was standing in a bathroom covered in my child's forcefully severed hair, calling the violent physical assault of a 10-year-old girl fair. I looked at Tasha. My sister dropped the heavy craft scissors onto the vanity with a loud clatter. She did not look sorry. She looked incredibly triumphant. My father Marcus finally released his weight from the door and avoided my gaze, suddenly finding the marble floor tiles absolutely fascinating. In the past, the old Nia would have screamed. I would have thrown things. I would have demanded apologies that I knew would never come, and I would have cried until I was physically sick. I had spent 32 years swallowing their blatant favoritism and emotional abuse just to keep the peace. But the woman standing in that bathroom was not the scapegoat sister anymore. I am a public relations crisis manager for top-tier corporate brands. When a catastrophic crisis hits you, do not panic. You secure the perimeter, you assess the damage, and you immediately gather the evidence. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my phone. I did not say a single word. I raised the camera and snapped a photograph. The harsh flash illuminated the bathroom, capturing the thick clumps of Zuri's natural coils scattered across the white tiles, the sharp scissors abandoned on the counter, and the guilty, shocked faces of the 3 people who had just committed a crime against my child. "What are you doing?" Tasha demanded, taking a nervous step forward. "Put that phone away right now." I ignored her completely. I walked past my father, knelt down on the ruined hair, and wrapped my blazer around my trembling daughter. I picked Zuri up in my arms. She buried her face in my neck, her hot tears soaking right through my silk shirt. I turned around and walked out of that house. I did not shout. I did not curse. I did not even slam the heavy front door behind me. The absolute suffocating silence I left in my wake was far more terrifying than any screaming match could ever be. We drove home with the sound of Zuri's quiet sobs filling the car. That evening, I sat on the edge of my bed while my daughter finally slept from sheer emotional exhaustion. I had spent an hour trying to even out the jagged, cruel patches Tasha had left behind, assuring Zuri that her crown was still beautiful. My phone screen lit up the dark bedroom. The family group chat, ironically named Family First, was exploding with notifications. They were doing exactly what they always did. They were spinning the narrative to make themselves the victims. They were coordinating their stories to gaslight me into submission. Tasha sent the first message. "You really ruined Chloe's special day by storming out of here like a lunatic. You always have to make everything about you." I was doing Zuri a favor, her hair looked unkempt anyway. My father chimed in next. "Nia, call your mother immediately. You made her blood pressure spike with your dramatic exit. It was just a haircut. Stop being so overly sensitive and teach your daughter some resilience." Then came my mother's message, the final nail in the coffin. "We are family. We share the spotlight. Chloe needed to shine today, and Zuri was taking all the attention. If you want to hold a grudge over some split ends, you are the toxic one. I expect you to call and apologize to your sister tomorrow morning." I stared at the glowing screen. They actually believed I was going to swallow this. They thought because I had stayed quiet my entire life to keep their fragile peace, I would swallow the physical and emotional assault of my only child. I typed out a reply. My fingers were perfectly steady, cold as ice. I hit send on a simple 2-word message. No worries. I put my phone face down on the nightstand and walked across the hall to plug in Zuri's devices. I picked up her phone to connect the charger. The screen woke up showing an application she had left open in her panic. It was TikTok. Zuri loved making transition videos and dancing to trending audio. As I went to close the app, I noticed a red notification dot resting on her drafts folder. I tapped it, intending to just clear the screen so the battery could charge faster. The thumbnail of the most recent draft made my blood run ice cold. It was a video recorded from the angle of the bathroom sink, clearly propped up against the mirror. I pressed play. The video had captured everything. Zuri had set her phone up to record an outfit transition right before Tasha barged in. The camera had been rolling the entire time. It captured my father bracing his large frame against the door to trap her inside. It captured my mother's hands violently pinning Zuri's arms down against the counter. It captured the vicious, ugly, jealous words Tasha spat as she hacked away at my daughter's hair. It captured the exact moment they crossed the line from toxic family members into actual criminals. The video was crisp and the audio was flawless. It was undeniable, irrefutable proof. I watched it 3 times in the quiet dark of my daughter's room. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. They thought they had cut me down to size. They had no idea they had just handed me the very blade I would use to sever their perfect, privileged lives forever. The morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Crown and Glory, the most exclusive Black-owned hair salon in the city. The air smelled of sweet almond oil lavender and the comforting hum of professional hair dryers. It was a sanctuary. I sat in a plush velvet chair next to my daughter holding her hand tightly. Miss Denise, the salon owner and a master braider, stood behind Zuri with a look of quiet fury on her face. She gently traced the jagged, ruined edges of Zuri's hair. She did not ask unnecessary questions. She simply gathered my daughter's remaining curls into her hands with utmost reverence. "We are going to make you look like royalty, little mama," Miss Denise said, her voice rich and steady. A crown is a crown no matter who tries to tilt it. Zuri sniffled, looking down at her lap. Her eyes were still puffy from crying the night before. I watched the mirror as Miss Denise began the careful process of washing, deep conditioning and sectioning. I leaned forward and gently tilted Zuri's chin up so she had to meet my gaze in the reflection. "Why does Aunt Tasha hate me so much?" Zuri asked, her voice cracking. "Why did Grandma and Grandpa let her do it?" I took a deep breath. I needed to tell her the truth, but I needed to say it in a way that would armor her heart rather than break it further. "She does not hate you, Zuri," I said softly. "She is intimidated by you. She looks at your confidence, your beautiful natural hair, your bright spirit, and she sees everything she forces herself to hide. She spends thousands of dollars on wigs and designer clothes to feel worthy, but you wake up radiating worth. People like Tasha cannot stand the light when they are determined to live in the dark." Zuri wiped a stray tear from her cheek. "But Grandma said I was taking Chloe's spotlight." I squeezed her hand. "Your grandmother is broken, and she broke Tasha a long time ago. I want to tell you a story. Something I promised myself I would never bring up, but you are old enough to understand now." I watched Miss Denise begin to expertly weave protective extensions into Zuri's hair, creating intricate, beautiful box braids that would mask the damage. The rhythmic, soothing motion gave me the strength to voice the history I had buried for decades. When I was growing up, I explained Aunt Tasha was exactly like Chloe is now. She had to be the best, the prettiest, the most celebrated. If I got an A on a science project, Grandma would hide my report card and buy Tasha a new dress because she felt bad that Tasha got a C. When I was 16, I worked evening shifts at a diner for an entire year to save up for my first car. The day I was supposed to go buy it, Grandpa took my cash envelope from my room. He used my hard-earned money to pay off Tasha's credit card debt because she had maxed it out on designer bags and was crying about it. He told me I was young and could just save up again, but family needed to help family. Zuri's eyes widened in the mirror. "They stole your money." "Yes," I said evenly. "And they stole my opportunities." When I was accepted into a prestigious public relations program out of state, they drained my college tuition fund to pay for Tasha's extravagant wedding to Uncle Kevin. They told me I could just take out student loans, but Tasha deserved a fairy tale day. Tasha even went out of her way to date a boy I really liked in high school, just to prove she could take him away from me. She dated him for 2 weeks, dumped him, and laughed in my face. And through it all, Grandma and Grandpa defended her. They said I needed to be the bigger person. They said I needed to keep the peace. Miss Denise hummed a quiet sound of solidarity, her hands moving swiftly, transforming trauma into art. "I spent my whole life shrinking myself down so Tasha could feel tall." I continued, I let them clip my wings because I thought that was what a good sister and a good daughter was supposed to do. I swallowed my pride, I paid my own way through life, and I built my own company from the ground up without a single dollar from them. I thought I had made peace with who they were. I thought I could manage the toxicity by just smiling and playing along at family dinners. I stood up and wrapped my arms around Zuri's shoulders, pressing my cheek against hers. But I was wrong, I whispered fiercely. I tolerated their disrespect when it was aimed at me. But the moment they put their hands on you, the moment they brought scissors to your beautiful hair, they crossed a boundary that can never be uncrossed. I will never let anyone make you feel small so they can feel big. Not ever again. Zuri leaned back against me. Miss Denise finished the last braid and clipped a sparkling golden bead onto the end. She spun the salon chair around. Zuri looked in the mirror. The uneven, traumatized patches were gone. In their place were long, gorgeous, flawless braids that framed her face like a halo. For the first time in 24 hours, my daughter smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. We paid Miss Denise generously and walked out of the salon into the bright afternoon sun. Zuri held her head high, the golden beads clinking softly against each other with every step. My heart swelled with a fierce, unapologetic, protective instinct. My family had spent a lifetime relying on my silence. They had banked on my willingness to forgive the unforgivable. They had mistaken my chosen peace for weakness. As we walked to the car, my phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out to check the screen. It was another barrage of messages from my parents and Tasha, acting as if nothing monumental had happened. They were already moving on to their next grand event, completely dismissing the violence of yesterday. It was the same cycle they had employed since my childhood. Commit the offense, demand I get over it, and punish me if I dared to hold them accountable. I slipped the phone back into my bag without responding. I buckled Zuri into the back seat and climbed behind the steering wheel. I did not start the engine right away. I sat there in the quiet of the car, gripping the leather steering wheel, as I mentally mapped out the battlefield. In crisis management, the first rule is to control the narrative. My family thought they controlled the narrative because they had always controlled me. They had spent decades casting me as the difficult, ungrateful daughter while painting Tasha as the flawless victim of my supposed jealousy. They used Kevin's corporate prestige and his white privilege as a shield, treating me like an uneducated subordinate instead of the highly successful executive I had become. They had underestimated me for the absolute last time. I was going to systematically dismantle the fake reality they had built. I was going to use their own arrogance, their own greed, and their own cruel words against them. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb. My daughter was safe, her crown was restored, and my conscience was crystal clear. The era of keeping the peace was officially dead. The era of consequences had arrived. The Bluetooth display on my car dashboard lit up just as I pulled into my driveway. The name flashing across the screen made my grip on the steering wheel tighten. Kevin Davis, my brother-in-law, the regional director of a massive national bank, a man who wore his white privilege like a tailored suit. Kevin had always treated my family with a thinly veiled paternalistic arrogance. He loved playing the wealthy savior who had elevated Tasha by marrying her, and he never missed an opportunity to remind me that I was just a single mother working too hard to compensate for my lack of a husband. I shifted the car into park and let it ring 3 times. I took a slow, steadying breath. In my line of work, you never enter a negotiation without knowing exactly what the other side wants. Kevin wanted submission. He wanted to ensure his pristine suburban life remained untouched by the violence his wife had committed. I tapped the screen to answer and simultaneously pressed the discreet record button on my secondary work phone. "Nia, glad I caught you," Kevin said. His voice was smooth, carrying that fake corporate warmth he used to close bad deals. "Listen, Tasha is a wreck right now. She feels terrible that things got a little out of hand at the party. You storming out really upset Chloe. We need to handle this like adults, not angry teenagers." I stared straight ahead through the windshield. A little out of hand. That was what he called 3 adults holding down a child to hack off her hair. I kept my voice perfectly flat. "Go on, Kevin." He chuckled, a condescending sound that grated against my eardrums. Look, I know you are upset. Hair is a big deal to you girls. But Tasha was just trying to help. We are willing to let your dramatic exit slide, but I am calling to make sure we are all on the same page moving forward. No police, no lawyers, no making a mountain out of a molehill. This is a family matter, Nia. We keep it in the family. And if I decide that assaulting my daughter is not just a family matter, I asked quietly. The fake warmth in Kevin's voice evaporated instantly. The mask dropped, revealing the cold, calculating man underneath. I highly suggest you rethink that, Nia. Let us look at the facts. I am a senior executive with a very wide, very powerful network in this city. You are a single black mother who works 60-hour weeks. You travel for crisis management. You are constantly on the phone. You leave Zuri with sitters. My blood ran cold, but I did not interrupt him. I needed him to say every single word on the record. If you decide to be vindictive and drag my wife's name through the mud, Kevin continued, his tone dropping to a sharp, menacing level, I will have no choice but to protect my family. And protecting my family might mean making a phone call to Child Protective Services. He paused, letting the threat hang heavy in the air. I have a lot of friends in high places, Nia. All it takes is one anonymous tip from a concerned uncle. A tip about a highly stressed, overworked single mother who is fostering a toxic environment and neglecting her child. You know exactly how the system treats women like you. They will show up at your door. They will question your daughter. They might even place her in temporary care while they investigate. Do you really want to put Zuri through that kind of trauma over a bad haircut? The sheer audacity of his threat was staggering. He was weaponizing the systemic biases of the child welfare system against me. He knew exactly what buttons to push, relying on the deep-rooted fear that mothers of color have of being unfairly targeted by institutions. He was using his corporate power and his racial privilege to shield his wife from the consequences of child abuse, threatening to rip my family apart if I dared to seek justice. In the past, a threat like this would have broken me. I would have panicked, cried, and surrendered to protect my child from the system. Kevin was banking on that fear. He expected me to crumble. He expected me to beg. But Kevin did not understand who he was dealing with. He saw a struggling single mother. He did not see the crisis manager who dismantled multi-million-dollar corporate scandals before breakfast. He did not realize that by making this explicit recorded threat, he was handing me the exact ammunition I needed to destroy his entire career. I kept my breathing steady. I channeled every ounce of professional discipline I possessed to keep the fury out of my voice. I needed him to feel victorious. I needed him to believe he had won, so he would let his guard down completely. You would really call CPS on your own niece? I asked, injecting just the right amount of defeat and tremor into my voice. I would do whatever it takes to protect my wife and my reputation, Kevin stated coldly. So let us be smart about this, Nia. You delete whatever pictures you took. You calm down. You bring Zuri over for Sunday dinner next week, and we will pretend this little misunderstanding never happened. We are giving you a pass. Do not make me regret it. I stared at the recording app on my second phone. The audio waves had captured every single syllable of his extortion. It was a masterpiece of corporate self-destruction. I understand, Kevin, I said softly, playing the role of the defeated submissive woman to absolute perfection. You are right. I do not want any trouble with the system. I will keep it in the family. Good girl, Kevin said, his arrogance fully restored. I knew you would see reason. Have a good evening, Nia. The line went dead. I lowered the phone from my ear. The silence in the car was absolute, broken only by the steady, rhythmic thumping of my own heart. I saved the audio file, uploaded it to my encrypted cloud server, and sent a backup copy to my personal legal counsel. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Kevin Davis thought he had just put me in my place. He thought his position as a regional bank director made him untouchable. He was completely oblivious to the fact that his bank had a strict zero-tolerance policy for employees who used their corporate titles to intimidate, extort, or threaten members of the public. He was oblivious to the fact that threatening to file a false report with Child Protective Services was a career-ending move if it ever reached the ears of the bank's ethics board. My family had drawn their battle lines. They had decided that protecting Tasha's fragile ego was worth sacrificing my daughter's bodily autonomy and threatening my custody. They had brought a knife to a gunfight, assuming I would just stand there and bleed. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out of the car. The evening air was crisp and cool. I walked up the driveway to my home, my sanctuary where my beautiful daughter was safely watching television with her fresh, gorgeous braids. I had my evidence. I had my motive. And now, thanks to Kevin's astonishing arrogance, I had the perfect strategy to tear their privileged, hypocritical world down to the studs. The game was no longer just about a haircut. It was about absolute, unequivocal ruin. I walked through the front door of my home, locking it securely behind me. The scent of lavender and vanilla greeted me, a stark contrast to the sterile hostility of my sister's mansion. Zuri was curled up on the living room sofa, completely absorbed in a cartoon, her beautiful new box braids cascading over her shoulders. I kissed the top of her head, ignoring the lingering knot in my stomach, and told her I had some quick work to finish. I promised we would order her favorite pizza for dinner. She beamed at me, entirely unaware of the storm I was about to unleash on the people who had hurt her. I stepped into my home office and closed the door. This room was my command center. It was the place where I had killed negative press for Fortune 500 companies and salvaged the careers of disgraced politicians. I sat down at my massive glass desk, woke up my monitors, and brought up the encrypted audio file of Kevin's voice. I listened to it one more time. His arrogant tone, his blatant racism, his sickening confidence that he could manipulate the child welfare system to break me. It was flawless evidence. I opened a secure communication channel and dialed Marcus Vance. Marcus was not just a lawyer. He was a corporate shark who specialized in employment law and executive misconduct. We had collaborated on several high-stakes PR disasters over the years, and he owed me more than a few favors. He answered on the second ring. I did not bother with pleasantries. I told Marcus I was sending him a file and that I needed him to listen to it immediately. I sat in silence for the 3 minutes it took him to review the audio. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a sharp edge of professional anticipation. He asked me if Kevin was still employed at the National Investment Bank. I confirmed that he was the regional director. Marcus let out a low whistle, recognizing the exact same corporate suicide I had seen. He told me that Kevin had explicitly tied his professional title to an illegal threat of extortion against a minority single mother. In the current corporate climate, that was not just a fireable offense. It was a massive liability for the bank. I told Marcus I did not just want Kevin fired. I wanted his entire career dismantled so thoroughly that he could never leverage his power against anyone ever again. I needed his stock options frozen. I needed his severance revoked under a gross misconduct clause. Marcus agreed immediately. He told me to leave the legal framing to him. He would draft a formal complaint citing extortion, abuse of power, and racial bias, and prepare it for the bank's Ethics and Compliance Board. But a legal complaint was only the first phase of my strategy. In my industry, legal action is the hammer, but public relations is the scalpel. If Kevin thought he could weaponize his network against me, he was about to learn how a true master controlled the narrative. I opened my contact database and pulled up the direct email addresses for the bank's chief executive officer, the head of human resources, and the chief diversity officer. Banks thrive on reputation. They spend millions of dollars annually promoting their commitment to equity and community support. The absolute last thing they want is a leaked audio recording of their regional director threatening to weaponize Child Protective Services against a black child to cover up a family assault. I drafted a meticulously worded email. I did not write it as an angry sister-in-law. I wrote it as a highly connected public relations executive who managed the public image of several of the bank's largest corporate clients. I outlined the nature of the recording, attaching the audio file as Exhibits A and B. I explicitly noted that Kevin Davis had invoked his position at their institution to intimidate a victim of child abuse into silence. I stated that while I was keeping this matter internal for now, I fully expected swift and decisive action in accordance with their zero-tolerance policy on executive misconduct. I did not send the email yet. Timing in crisis management is everything. You never strike when the enemy is on high alert. You strike when they are celebrating. You strike when they feel invincible. Kevin had told me he was taking the rest of the week to prepare for a major regional audit. I scheduled the email to hit the executive inboxes exactly at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, right before his crucial quarterly review. With Kevin's professional execution locked and loaded, I turned my attention to the second front of my war. Tasha. Kevin was the shield, but Tasha was the disease. She had cut my daughter's hair out of pure venomous jealousy. I needed to understand exactly what had triggered her sudden escalation. Tasha was vain and cruel, but she was also incredibly calculated. There was a specific reason she had attacked Zuri's hair on that exact day. I pulled up my secondary monitor and logged into my media monitoring software. I ran a comprehensive search on Tasha's social media accounts, cross-referencing her recent activities, her location tags, and her known associates in the local influencer scene. It took me less than 40 minutes to find the anomaly. Tasha had been aggressively engaging with a specific corporate account for the past 3 weeks. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the digital footprint. It was a major beauty conglomerate. The pieces began to fall into place. Tasha was not just lashing out randomly, she was competing for something. And knowing my sister, it was something that came with a massive paycheck and a heavy dose of public validation. The spiderweb was spinning out perfectly before me, and I was holding all the threads. I just needed to pull them at the exact right moment to watch their entire world collapse. I picked up my phone and dialed a secure number I had not used in months. Simone was a senior casting director at one of the top talent agencies in New York. If a major beauty brand was looking for fresh faces, Simone knew about it before the ink on the budget was even dry. She answered on the first ring, her voice crisp and professional. I bypassed the small talk entirely. I asked Simone what major beauty campaigns focusing on Black women were currently casting in our region and who the final contenders were. Simone let out a knowing laugh and told me I was a little late to the party. She explained that the biggest campaign of the entire year was just wrapping up its casting phase. A top-tier global cosmetics brand was launching a massive, highly publicized initiative called the Natural Black Hair Campaign. It was a nationwide search celebrating the authentic beauty of natural coils and protective styles. The brand was investing heavily in this new direction, and the contract for the lead child ambassador was worth a staggering $500,000. My heart hammered against my ribs. I asked Simone if she could run a quick search in her database for a specific submission. I gave her Tasha's email address and Chloe's name. I heard the rapid clacking of Simone typing on her keyboard. A few seconds later, the typing stopped. Simone sounded genuinely confused when she spoke again. She confirmed that Tasha had indeed submitted a portfolio 2 weeks ago, but Simone pointed out a massive discrepancy. The agency had sent out a final offer letter just yesterday, but the offer was not for Chloe. I asked Simone to forward me the email thread immediately. The moment the file landed in my inbox, I opened it on my large desktop monitor. Tasha had submitted a joint portfolio, trying to market herself as a successful mommy vlogger with a beautiful daughter and a beautiful niece. She had used stunning, high-quality, unauthorized photos of Zuri's thick braided crown to grab the agency's attention. Knowing my sister, she fully expected the brand to use Zuri as bait, but ultimately select the lighter-skinned, looser-curled Chloe for the actual campaign. It was a classic bait-and-switch tactic born out of her own internalized texturism, but her plan had backfired spectacularly. I read the response from the brand's executive creative director. The email stated clearly that while Chloe was a lovely child, she did not fit the specific, authentic demographic they wanted for this particular natural hair campaign. However, the executives were absolutely mesmerized by Zuri. The email officially offered Zuri the $500,000 contract, requesting a final in-person meeting to sign the paperwork. The timestamp on that email was exactly 8 o'clock yesterday morning, just 3 hours before Chloe's birthday party started. The reality of what I was reading hit me with the devastating force of a freight train. I had to grip the edge of my glass desk to keep my hands from shaking. My sister did not assault my child over a petty birthday tantrum. She did not hold a pair of scissors to my daughter's head because Chloe was feeling insecure about her own looks. Tasha had received that email. She realized that a $500,000 contract, along with the national fame and validation she desperately craved, was slipping through her fingers and going to the niece she deeply despised. She knew the entire campaign hinged completely on Zuri's natural hair. If Zuri no longer had her hair, she could not shoot the campaign. Tasha had orchestrated the entire bathroom assault to permanently disqualify Zuri from the contract. I could see her twisted sociopathic logic playing out perfectly in her mind. She would report back to the agency that Zuri had suffered a tragic haircut accident and could no longer participate. But luckily, her own daughter Chloe was standing by, ready to step in and save the $500,000 deal. Tasha was willing to physically violate and emotionally destroy a 10-year-old girl, her own blood, just to secure a paycheck and a billboard for herself. The sheer calculated evil of the motive made my vision blur with hot, blinding rage. Kevin thought he was dealing with an angry mother over a bad haircut. He had absolutely no idea his wife was actively attempting to commit corporate contract fraud while simultaneously committing child abuse. I downloaded the entire email chain. I saved every single attachment and forwarded the portfolio images to my secure cloud server. I now had the audio of Kevin's extortion and the digital paper trail of Tasha's financial motive. Every single thing. They loved their money, their reputation, and their pristine suburban image was built on a fragile foundation of lies and manipulation. They thought they were playing a simple game of family bullying, moving pieces around the board to get what they wanted while expecting me to stay silent. But I was playing chess. I gathered all the evidence into a single encrypted master folder on my desktop. I had the motive, the weapon, and the confessions. I just needed to tighten the noose. I pulled up to the manicured lawn of my parents' pristine suburban house later that afternoon. I had called ahead, telling my mother I needed to pick up the rest of Zuri's overnight clothes and toys that were left behind during the birthday party chaos. I made sure my voice sounded small and defeated on the phone. I needed them to think I was complying with Kevin's extortion. I needed them to believe they had successfully broken me into submission. I unlocked the front door and walked into the grand foyer. The walls were lined with expensive framed photographs, almost all of them featuring Tasha, Kevin, and Chloe. Zuri and I were notably absent from the family gallery, a visual representation of our place in their hierarchy. My father, Marcus, was sitting in his leather recliner reading a golf magazine, a glass of bourbon resting on the side table. My mother, Brenda, was sipping iced tea on the sofa watching a daytime talk show. They looked entirely unbothered. They looked like two people who had not violently held their own granddaughter down against a marble sink just 24 hours ago. My mother glanced up and gave me a tight, condescending smile. She told me she was glad I had finally calmed down and decided to be reasonable. She pointed toward the hallway and said Zuri's things were in a duffel bag near the guest room. I nodded quietly and walked down the hall. I retrieved the bag, but before returning to the living room, I reached into my pocket and hit the record button on my secondary phone. I walked back and stood near the television, clutching the duffel bag to my chest, like a nervous, apologetic daughter. I kept my posture slightly slouched, playing the role they expected to see. I told them I was sorry for making a scene yesterday. I said I knew Tasha was under a lot of pressure lately with her influencer image. I took a slow breath and dropped the bait directly into the water. I mentioned that a friend in the public relations industry told me Tasha was pushing Chloe very hard for some national hair modeling campaigns. I asked if any brands had called them back yet. My mother took the bait instantly. She could never resist the opportunity to brag about her golden child, nor could she resist the chance to make me feel inferior. She sat up straighter on the sofa, a smug, triumphant look spreading across her face. She set her iced tea down on the coaster with a sharp clink. She told me Chloe had a very sophisticated, highly marketable aesthetic that high-end brands were desperate for. She confidently stated that Tasha was finalizing a $500,000 contract with a global cosmetics company for their new campaign. She boasted that the family was going to be featured on billboards across the country, elevating their social status to a level I could never comprehend. I kept my expression perfectly blank. I asked her why Tasha would need to cut Zuri's hair if Chloe was already securing the deal. I injected just enough naive confusion into my voice to make them feel infinitely smarter than me. My father let out a heavy, irritated sigh and tossed his magazine onto the coffee table. He looked at me with absolute disdain. He said I was always so slow to understand how the real business world worked. He explicitly stated that the brand had initially shown interest in Zuri, which was a ridiculous mistake on their part. He said Zuri's hair was too ethnic, too unmanageable, and absolutely not the polished, acceptable image the family needed to project on a national scale. My mother eagerly jumped back into the conversation to validate his horrific logic. She said Tasha needed that money to pay off her mounting credit card debts and maintain her lifestyle. She admitted right there in the open living room that they had to intervene. She said if Zuri showed up to the final casting, the brand might actually pick her out of some misguided diversity initiative. So they fixed the problem. She looked me dead in the eye and said they held Zuri down so Tasha could level the playing field. She proudly declared that family sacrifices must be made to protect their financial status, and Chloe simply deserved the spotlight more. My father nodded in agreement, adding that I was doing fine financially with my little PR job, so I did not need the money anyway. He told me to stop being selfish and learn to support my sister for once in my life. He said the family needed that $500,000, and a bad haircut was a microscopic price to pay for Tasha's ultimate success. The audio recorder in my pocket captured every single syllable of their sickening confession. They had just freely admitted to coordinating a physical assault on a minor for financial gain. They had confessed to premeditated sabotage and child abuse to secure a corporate contract. They were so blinded by their own arrogance and their lifelong habit of treating me like a stepping stone that they did not even realize they were handing me the final nail for their coffins. I looked at the two people who had brought me into this world. I felt absolutely no attachment to them anymore. The biological tie was completely severed, replaced by a cold clinical determination to see them face the maximum consequences of their greed. I told them they were right. I told them I finally understood exactly how the real world worked and how family sacrifices needed to be made. I thanked them for clearing everything up for me. My mother smiled, looking thoroughly satisfied with her parenting, and told me to shut the door on my way out. I walked out of the house with Zuri's duffel bag in one hand and the most destructive piece of evidence I had ever acquired in the other. I got into my car and stopped the recording. I played it back immediately. The audio was pristine. The intent was malicious, calculating, and driven entirely by money. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at my watch. The trap was fully set. I had the extortion tape from Kevin. I had the email chain proving Tasha's motive. And now I had the recorded confession of my parents acting as willing accomplices to a physical assault for a $500,000 payout. The only thing left to do was wait for them to walk blindly into the execution chamber they had built for themselves. I sat in the driver's seat of my car with the engine turned off, listening to the playback of the recording I had just captured in my parents' living room. The sound quality was flawless, picking up every toxic inflection of my mother's voice. I leaned my head against the leather headrest and let the reality of her words wash over me one final time. "You have to be realistic," Nia Brenda's voice hissed through the phone speaker. "Chloe has those beautiful mixed features. She is highly marketable to a mainstream audience. She deserves to be the face of this campaign far more than your dark-skinned Zuri. We had to fix the situation before the brand made a costly mistake. Tasha is drowning in debt, and this family needs that $500,000 to survive." My father's voice chimed in right after Heavy with his usual arrogant justification. "Your mother is right. You have always been too blind to see how the real world operates. We did what was necessary to protect the family's financial future." I stopped the recording. The sheer, unadulterated colorism and self-hatred oozing from my own parents was breathtaking. They had physically violated their dark-skinned, fully black granddaughter to elevate their lighter-skinned, mixed-race granddaughter, all for the sake of a corporate payout. They had weaponized my daughter's beautiful complexion and natural hair, treating her blackness as a liability that needed to be erased so Tasha could pay off her designer credit card debt. A profound, icy calm settled over my entire body. Any lingering shred of familial guilt I might have harbored evaporated into thin air. They were not my family. They were parasites who fed on my insecurities, and now they were trying to feed on my child. I picked up my work tablet from the passenger seat and powered it on. I needed to verify the exact corporate entity Tasha was dealing with. I pulled up the forwarded email chain I had intercepted from Simone at the talent agency. I scrolled to the bottom of the creative director's message and zoomed in on the official company logo in the email signature. It was a stylized golden lotus flower. The brand was Lumina Cosmetics. I stared at that golden lotus for a full 60 seconds. A genuine, unrestrained laugh bubbled up from my chest, echoing loudly in the quiet cabin of my car. I laughed until my eyes actually watered. The universe did not just have a sense of humor. It had a sense of poetic, devastating justice. Lumina Cosmetics was not just a major global beauty brand. They were an exclusive top-tier client on a lucrative retainer with my public relations firm. For the past 2 years, my team had been directly responsible for entirely rebranding Lumina Cosmetics. I was the lead crisis manager who had personally pitched them the idea for the natural black hair campaign. I had designed the entire initiative to help them recover from a diversity scandal the previous year. My agency managed their public image, vetted their brand ambassadors, and oversaw their corporate rollout. I literally held their brand reputation in the palm of my hand. Tasha thought she was negotiating with a faceless corporate entity that she could manipulate with forged photos and a tragic sob story about a sudden haircut accident. She had absolutely no idea that the final decision-maker, the ultimate gatekeeper for that $500,000 contract, was the exact same sister she had spent her entire life trying to destroy. I picked up my primary work phone and dialed my senior account director, a razor-sharp woman named Valerie who handled the day-to-day operations for the Lumina account. She answered immediately. I bypassed the greetings and gave her direct, rapid-fire instructions. I told Valerie that the Lumina campaign had found its lead ambassador, but there was a severe compliance issue we needed to handle internally. I instructed her to draft a highly official congratulatory email on Lumina corporate letterhead and send it directly to Tasha. I told Valerie to inform Tasha that the brand executives were absolutely thrilled to offer the $500,000 contract to Chloe. I made sure Valerie included specific instructions that Tasha needed to come to our downtown corporate headquarters on Friday morning for an exclusive closed-door contract signing and a celebratory champagne toast. Make sure you emphasize that this is a family celebration, I instructed Valerie, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Tell Tasha we want the entire family there for a promotional photo opportunity. Tell her to bring her husband Kevin. Tell her to bring her parents Marcus and Brenda. Tell her to dress to impress because the board of directors will be watching. Valerie, always the consummate professional, did not question the bizarre request. She simply confirmed the details and asked which conference room she should book for the signing event. I told her to book the Grand Executive Suite on the 40th floor, the one with the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, the one that shared a direct line of sight with the executive boardroom. I hung up the phone and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My parents and my sister had spent 32 years treating me like a stepping stone. They thought they could step on my daughter's neck to reach the top. But I was about to invite them to the absolute highest penthouse in the city, just so I could personally push them out the window. The trap was officially set. The bait was heavily poisoned with $500,000 of fake corporate money. I started the engine of my car and drove away from the house I grew up in, completely ready to orchestrate the most spectacular, financially ruinous public execution my family had ever seen. The notification chime on Tasha's phone must have echoed through her massive, heavily mortgaged living room like a choir of angels. She had been staring at her inbox for 48 hours straight, waiting for the final confirmation from Lumina Cosmetics. When the email with the Golden Lotus logo appeared on her screen, she did not even bother to read the fine print. She saw the words $500,000 and the phrase contract signing ceremony. She let out a high-pitched shriek of absolute victory that sent her daughter Chloe running into the room. Tasha immediately picked up her phone and dialed our mother. I could easily imagine the scene playing out in that sterile suburban house. Tasha pacing the hardwood floors, bragging about how her superior genetics and impeccable styling had secured the family's financial future. Brenda undoubtedly praised her golden child, completely validating the violent assault they had committed just days prior. To them, the official corporate email was absolute proof that they had made the right choice. The universe was rewarding them for silencing the inconvenient dark-skinned niece. They felt entirely vindicated. With the promise of a $500,000 payout supposedly guaranteed, Tasha did exactly what a deeply insecure, financially illiterate narcissist would do. She went on an absolute spending rampage. She drove straight to the luxury shopping district downtown, marching into designer boutiques and maxing out the very last remaining limits on her heavily burdened credit cards. She bought a tailored white silk suit that cost more than her monthly mortgage payment. She bought Chloe a matching designer dress and tiny, uncomfortable patent leather shoes. Tasha wanted them to look like wealthy, established socialites when they walked into the Lumina Cosmetics headquarters. She wanted the board of directors to see a flawless, highly marketable family. She was spending money she did not actually have, banking entirely on a contract that did not actually exist. Kevin received the news while sitting in his corner office at the National Investment Bank. He immediately sent a calendar invite to his subordinates, blocking out Friday morning for a highly important family business venture. He strutted around his banking floor, casually mentioning to his fellow executives that his wife was signing a massive corporate brand deal. Kevin thrived on proximity to power and wealth, and the idea of his family becoming the face of a national campaign fed his massive, fragile ego. He booked a premium luxury SUV service to transport them to the signing because he wanted to arrive at the corporate headquarters looking like royalty. More importantly, Kevin firmly believed his threatening phone call to me had neutralized the only potential roadblock to their success. He thought I was cowering in my house, terrified of Child Protective Services, effectively silenced by his white privilege and corporate authority. He prepared to reap the rewards of my forced submission, completely blind to the guillotine swinging down toward his neck. My parents were equally swept up in the delusion. Marcus and Brenda drove to their favorite upscale department store to purchase outfits specifically for the signing ceremony. Brenda chose an extravagant pastel dress and a wide-brimmed hat, dressing as if she were attending a royal wedding rather than a corporate meeting. Marcus bought a brand new tailored sports coat. They spent their evenings calling their country club friends, dropping heavy hints about a major financial windfall coming to the family. They congratulated themselves on their brilliant parenting and decisive action. In their twisted minds, holding Zuri down and chopping off her hair was not an act of vicious abuse, but a necessary strategic business maneuver. They felt absolutely no remorse. They convinced themselves that I was simply a bitter, jealous sister who needed to learn my place. Their impending payday was all the absolution they required. They slept soundly that week, dreaming of billboards and bank deposits. By Thursday night, the family group chat that I had muted was overflowing with their unbridled excitement. Tasha posted photos of her new silk suit laid out on her bed. Brenda posted a picture of her fresh, expensive manicure. Kevin sent a message reminding everyone to be ready by 8 in the morning so the luxury transport could pick them up on time. Not a single one of them asked about Zuri. Not a single one of them expressed a fraction of an ounce of guilt or concern for the trauma they had inflicted on a 10-year-old girl. They had completely erased me and my daughter from their minds, focusing entirely on the golden ticket waiting for them at the top of the city skyline. Friday morning dawned bright and clear. I sat in my private office on the top floor of my public relations agency, sipping black coffee and watching the digital tracking grid on my computer monitor. Valerie had arranged for the luxury SUV service under the Lumina corporate account, which meant I had live GPS tracking of their exact location. I watched the little blue dot on the map pull up to Tasha's suburban mansion. I could picture them perfectly. Tasha emerging from her front door in her stark white silk suit, holding Chloe's hand, practicing her signature in the air. Kevin adjusting his expensive tie, flashing his fake corporate smile to the driver. Marcus and Brenda stepping into the vehicle with the smug satisfaction of people who believed they had successfully beaten the system. They were laughing and celebrating riding in a luxury vehicle paid for by my company, driving toward a skyscraper where I paid the lease to sign a contract that I had personally fabricated. I checked my watch. It was 8:30 in the morning. They were exactly 30 minutes away from the main lobby. I stood up from my desk and smoothed down the front of my tailored charcoal blazer. I picked up the thick manila folder containing the police reports, the audio transcripts, and the bank termination documents. My heartbeat was steady, rhythmic, and perfectly calm. The bait had been swallowed whole, and the prey was currently riding the elevator straight up to the slaughterhouse. The black luxury SUV glided to a seamless halt in front of the towering glass and steel facade of the downtown corporate plaza. I sat perfectly still in the dimly lit security control room on the 40th floor, my eyes locked on the bank of high-definition surveillance monitors illuminating the wall. My fingers rested lightly on the cool metal edge of the control console. Every camera in the lobby, the elevators, and the executive corridors was feeding directly into my private viewing station. The rear doors of the SUV opened, and my family stepped out onto the pristine pavement. Tasha emerged first, smoothing down the front of her stark white silk suit. She tilted her chin up, looking at the towering skyscraper, as if she had personally funded its construction. She held Chloe by the hand, constantly adjusting the collar of the child's designer dress, ensuring not a single thread was out of place. Marcus and Brenda followed, stepping out of the vehicle with their heads held unnaturally high. My mother adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, her face radiating a toxic, unearned pride. She looked around at the bustling downtown professionals, desperately wanting them to notice her arrival. Then came Kevin. He stepped out of the vehicle and buttoned his tailored suit jacket with a sharp, authoritative flick of his wrists. He handed a crisp bill to the driver, offering a condescending nod that practically screamed his perceived superiority. I watched his face on the high-resolution feed. He possessed the exact kind of blind, suffocating arrogance that only comes from a lifetime of never being told no. He truly believed he was the architect of this grand family victory. They walked through the revolving glass doors and stepped into the expansive marble lobby of my building. The vaulted ceilings and cascading crystal chandeliers reflected beautifully in Tasha's wide, greedy eyes. She practically strutted across the polished floor. I watched as they approached the main reception desk. Valerie had briefed the front desk security team meticulously. The head receptionist stood up immediately, greeting them with an incredibly bright, welcoming smile. "Welcome to the executive suites," the receptionist said, her voice carrying perfectly through the audio feed. "We have been expecting you for the Lumina Cosmetics signing. Please let me escort you directly to the private VIP elevator." My mother visibly swooned at the word VIP. She placed a hand on her chest, shooting a triumphant look at my father. Kevin puffed out his chest, stepping forward to take the lead. He thanked the receptionist with a slick, practiced charm, acting as if he navigated spaces like this every single day. As the receptionist guided them toward the exclusive elevator bank, Kevin pulled his smartphone from his inner jacket pocket. He slowed his pace just slightly, letting the rest of the family walk a few steps ahead. I watched him tap the screen, his thumbs moving quickly across the keyboard. A nasty, self-satisfied smirk crept across his face. A second later, the private work phone sitting on my control console vibrated. The screen lit up with a new message from Kevin Davis. I picked up the device and read the words he had just typed. "See, enduring it is good for you. Do not block the path of successful people. We are walking into the Lumina signing right now. I hope you and Zuri have a nice quiet day at home. Try to learn your place." A harsh, cold laugh escaped my throat. The sheer staggering audacity of the man was almost impressive. He was standing in the lobby of a building where I paid a premium corporate lease riding an elevator I had personally programmed for his arrival, and he was using his last few moments of professional relevance to gloat. He was so drunk on his own perceived power that he could not see the massive glaring red flags surrounding him. He did not notice that the corporate directory by the elevator bank did not list Lumina Cosmetics. He did not notice that the security badges the receptionist handed them were temporary visitor passes for an agency, not a beauty brand. I set the phone down and leaned closer to the primary monitor. The receptionist swiped her master key card, and the heavy steel doors of the VIP elevator slid open. My family stepped inside, crowding into the mirrored cabin. The doors slid shut, sealing them inside a metal box, hurtling upward at lightning speed. The elevator security camera provided a crystal-clear top-down view of their ascent. Tasha pulled a compact mirror from her designer bag, frantically checking her lipstick and smoothing her hair. She looked at Chloe, whispering strict instructions for the child to smile, sit up straight, and not speak unless spoken to. My mother was fixing my father's tie, practically bouncing on her heels with anticipation. Kevin stood at the back of the elevator, looking at his phone screen, undoubtedly waiting for my defeated, submissive reply. He wanted me to beg. He wanted me to lash out so he could feel validated in his cruelty. I gave him absolutely nothing. Complete silence is the most terrifying response you can give to a narcissist because it deprives them of the control they crave. The digital floor indicator on the camera feed ticked upward. Floor 20, floor 30, floor 35. They were ascending directly into the snare. I watched their chest cavities expand and contract with excited breaths. They were visualizing the $500,000 check. They were imagining the social media posts they would write, the country club dinners, where they would brag about their sudden wealth, the absolute validation of their toxic, abusive behavior. They truly believed that attacking my daughter had unlocked the doors to their wildest dreams. I stood up from the security console. The dark room felt incredibly quiet compared to the roaring anticipation in my veins. I walked over to the heavy glass door of the control room and pushed it open, stepping out into the brightly lit, impeccably designed executive corridor of my public relations firm. The digital indicator above the elevator bank at the end of the hall dinged a soft melodic chime. Floor 40. The heavy steel doors began to slide open. I did not walk toward them. I simply turned on my heel and walked into the grand executive conference room, taking my seat at the head of the long glass table. I smoothed my charcoal blazer one last time, folded my hands neatly on top of the manila folder, and waited for the receptionist to lead my unsuspecting family straight into the absolute worst moment of their entirely privileged lives. The heavy double doors of the elevator clicked shut, leaving my family in the capable hands of my executive team. Inside the boardroom, the silence was absolute. I sat in the high-backed leather executive chair positioned at the head of the massive mahogany table. I kept my chair turned entirely around, facing the floor to ceiling windows that offered a sweeping panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. To anyone walking into the room, I was just a silhouette, an imposing figure of corporate authority waiting to conduct business. I picked up my phone from the smooth wooden surface of the table. I did not dial the standard emergency line. In my line of work, you do not wait on hold with a central dispatcher when a crisis hits. I dialed the direct desk number for the watch commander at Police Precinct 4, a contact I had acquired and kept on speed dial after handling a major public relations incident for the city municipality 2 years ago. The line rang twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered. I did not bother with pleasantries. I spoke with the absolute precision of a woman who held every single card in the deck. Commander, this is Nia Vance. I am calling from my executive offices on the 40th floor of the Apex Plaza. I am reporting a felony battery and a confirmed case of child abuse. The suspects are currently sitting in my building. The commander immediately shifted into protocol, asking for names and details. I fed him the information with clinical detachment. I gave him Tasha's full legal name, my mother Brenda's name, and my father Marcus's name. I clearly stated that they had conspired to physically restrain and assault a 10-year-old child for financial extortion. Then I dropped the heaviest anchor. I informed the commander that Kevin Davis, the regional director of the National Investment Bank, was acting as an accessory after the fact. I explained that Kevin had used his corporate title to threaten me with fraudulent Child Protective Services reports to ensure my silence. I told the commander I had immaculate high-definition video evidence of the assault and crystal-clear audio recordings of the extortion threats. The commander asked if the suspects were armed or dangerous. I replied that they were only armed with unearned arrogance and severe delusions of grandeur. However, I warned him that they were extreme flight risks, once they realized their corporate payday was actually a criminal sting operation. The commander assured me that 2 unmarked squad cars were being dispatched immediately. He instructed his officers to enter quietly through the freight elevators to avoid a public scene in the lobby. I thanked him, ended the call, and placed my phone face down on the table. The police were on their way. The trap was entirely sealed. Out in the grand executive corridor, Valerie was executing her role with Academy Award-winning precision. Through the frosted glass panels of the boardroom, I could see the blurred, colorful silhouettes of my family being led down the hallway. Valerie later told me exactly how they behaved. Tasha was practically vibrating with greed. She strutted down the hallway in her stark white silk suit, looking around at the original modern art pieces and the sleek, minimalist architecture of my firm. She was loudly whispering to my mother about how she belonged in environments exactly like this. My mother Brenda was adjusting her ridiculous wide-brimmed hat, acting as though the entire corporate staff should be bowing to her as she passed. She even had the audacity to snap her fingers at a junior account executive who was carrying a tray of coffees, assuming the young woman was a servant hired for their comfort. Kevin was the most insufferable of them all. He walked with his chest puffed out, making a grand show of checking his expensive watch. He tried to engage Valerie in corporate jargon, asking patronizing questions about the building's lease terms and the square footage of the executive suites. He wanted to assert his dominance to prove that his title as a regional bank director made him the most important person on the floor. Valerie simply smiled her flawless, impenetrable corporate smile and guided them toward the slaughter. Chloe was dragged along by the wrist. The poor child looked exhausted and terrified in her stiff designer dress, entirely overwhelmed by the manic, greedy energy radiating from her parents and grandparents. She was just a prop to them, a ticket to be cashed in. I heard the heavy polished brass handle of the boardroom door turn. The thick glass doors swung open. Valerie stepped inside first, holding the door wide. "Right this way, please," she said, her voice echoing beautifully in the cavernous room. "The executive director will be with you momentarily to finalize the Lumina Cosmetics agreement. Please make yourselves comfortable." Tasha stepped into the room and let out a loud, dramatic gasp. She was completely awestruck by the sheer magnitude of the space. The boardroom was designed to intimidate. The table alone cost more than her car. The panoramic view of the city made the people inside feel like gods looking down on mortals. Tasha immediately pulled out her phone and started taking photos of the skyline, no doubt planning her triumphant social media posts. Kevin marched in right behind her, nodding in slow, arrogant approval. He walked straight toward the center of the table and unbuttoned his suit jacket, preparing to take a seat of honor. Marcus and Brenda shuffled in, looking slightly out of their depth, but doing their absolute best to mask it with haughty expressions. Brenda pulled out a chair for Chloe, instructing the child to sit up perfectly straight and not touch anything on the table. Valerie offered them a selection of sparkling water and artisanal pastries. Kevin waved his hand dismissively. "We do not need refreshments," he stated, using his best authoritative banking voice. "We are on a tight schedule today. Let the director know we are ready to sign the paperwork so we can get back to our other business obligations." Valerie offered a polite, totally unfazed nod. "Of course, sir. I will leave you to it." She stepped backward out of the room. She pulled the heavy, soundproof glass doors shut. The magnetic locks engaged with a heavy, definitive click. The sound was incredibly satisfying. It was the sound of a cage locking shut. Inside the room, the silence descended like a heavy blanket. The soundproofing cut them off entirely from the bustling agency outside. They were completely isolated. Tasha sat down next to Kevin, smoothing out her white silk skirt. She leaned over and whispered something to him, likely congratulating herself on securing their financial future. Marcus and Brenda settled into their plush leather chairs, looking around the room with greedy, calculating eyes. They were practically vibrating with anticipation. They thought they had won the lottery. They thought their brutal treatment of my daughter had finally paid off in the most spectacular way possible. They all sat there staring at the back of my high-backed leather executive chair. They waited for the faceless corporate director to turn around and hand them a check for $500,000. I took one final deep breath. I placed my hands flat on the smooth mahogany wood. It was time to introduce them to the new management. I gripped the armrests of the heavy leather chair and pushed my foot against the floor. The chair swiveled around in a slow, deliberate arc. I did not smile. I did not blink. I simply let the momentum carry me until I was facing them directly across the expansive mahogany table. The silence that followed was not just quiet. It was a physical weight dropping into the room. Tasha had been in the middle of adjusting a diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. Her hands froze entirely. Her jaw literally dropped, leaving her mouth hanging open in a comical display of pure, unadulterated shock. My mother Brenda let out a sharp, involuntary gasp, her hand flying up to clutch the pearls at her neck. My father Marcus blinked rapidly, rubbing his eyes as if his vision was malfunctioning. Kevin was the first to break the frozen tableau. His arrogant smile dissolved into a deep, irritated scowl. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the glass surface of the table. Kevin snapped, his voice sharp and scolding. "What are you doing in here? Did you follow us? This is a highly confidential corporate meeting. You cannot just sneak into executive boardrooms because you are throwing a tantrum. Get out before I call building security." I did not move a single muscle. I kept my hands folded neatly on top of my manila folder. I looked at Kevin with the kind of detached, clinical observation a scientist uses to study a very small, very loud insect. "You do not need to call security, Kevin," I said, my voice perfectly level and echoing clearly in the soundproof room. "I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Tasha finally found her voice. It was high-pitched and trembling with a mixture of confusion and mounting panic. She looked around the empty room, then back at me. "What are you talking about? Where is the brand director? Where is the Lumina executive we are supposed to meet?" I picked up a sleek silver pen and tapped it gently against the table. "You are looking at her, Tasha." My mother let out a harsh, mocking laugh. It was a brittle sound, completely devoid of actual humor. "Stop playing these ridiculous games, Nia. You are embarrassing yourself. We know you run some little public relations firm, but we are here to sign a $500,000 contract with a global cosmetics brand. Now get out of that chair and leave before the real executives arrive and have you arrested for trespassing." I stood up slowly. I buttoned my charcoal blazer with deliberate precision. I walked over to the side of the room where a massive digital display was mounted to the wall. I picked up the remote and powered it on. The screen illuminated the room with the glowing golden lotus logo of Lumina Cosmetics. Right beneath it, in bold, undeniable lettering, was the logo of my own agency, Apex Public Relations. I turned back to face my family. They were staring at the screen, the color draining from their faces one by one. "I am the lead crisis management director for Lumina Cosmetics," I stated, enunciating every single word so there could be no room for misunderstanding. "My agency handles their entire public image. I am the one who pitched the natural black hair campaign. I am the one who manages their brand ambassadors. And I am the one who drafted that offer letter you received yesterday morning." The room went dead silent again. I could practically hear the gears grinding in their heads as they desperately tried to reject the reality crashing down on them. "That is impossible," Tasha whispered, her voice barely audible. "The casting agency sent us that email. Simone sent it." "Simone works with me," I replied smoothly. "She sent you the initial rejection because Chloe did not fit the demographic. She forwarded me your unauthorized submission of Zuri. But that second email you received, the one offering Chloe the contract, the one that made you drive downtown and max out your credit cards on that ridiculous white silk suit, that email came directly from my desk." Kevin shot up out of his chair. His face was turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "You forged a corporate contract offer," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "That is illegal. You are committing fraud. I will have you thrown in federal prison by the end of the day." I leaned against the conference table and crossed my arms. "It is not fraud if there is no contract to sign, Kevin. I never sent a contract. I sent an invitation to a meeting, an invitation you all so eagerly accepted because your greed completely blinded you to basic corporate due diligence. Did you really think a global brand was going to hand you $500,000 without an initial screening, without legal representation? You walked in here blind because you were drunk on your own arrogance." Brenda stood up next. her hands trembling so badly she had to grip the back of her chair for support. She looked at me not with the usual contempt, but with a sudden dawning terror. "Nia," she said, her voice cracking. "What is this? Why are you doing this? Where is the money? Tasha needs that money." "There is no money, Mom," I said coldly. "There is no billboard. There is no campaign for Chloe. There is only a locked room, a very thick file of evidence, and a reckoning that is 32 years overdue." Tasha collapsed back into her chair. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She realized she had spent money she did not have. She realized she was financially ruined. But more than that, she realized she had been thoroughly, masterfully outplayed by the sister she had spent her entire life treating like garbage. Marcus slammed his fist down on the table, making Chloe jump in her seat. "You vindictive little brat," he roared. "You set us up! You brought us all the way down here just to humiliate your sister because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of Tasha." I walked back to my chair and picked up the thick manila folder. I dropped it heavily onto the center of the table. The sharp smack echoed like a gunshot. "I am not jealous of a woman who has to hold down a 10-year-old girl and hack off her hair just to feel significant," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "I brought you here because you assaulted my daughter. I brought you here because you plotted to steal her opportunities. And I brought you here because you, Dad, and you, Mom, stood by and helped her do it for a payout that was never going to happen." I looked at Kevin, who was frantically swiping at his phone screen, likely trying to find a signal to call his lawyers. The soundproof walls of the executive suite were reinforced with signal jamming mesh to prevent corporate espionage. He had 0 bars. He was completely cut off from his network of powerful friends. "Put the phone down, Kevin," I commanded. "Nobody is coming to save you. You are in my house now." Kevin glared at me, his eyes filled with absolute venom. "You think you are so smart, Nia. You think this little prank changes anything. We are walking out of here right now. And when I get back to my office, I am making that call to Child Protective Services. I am going to make sure you never see Zuri again." He grabbed Tasha by the arm and yanked her upward. "Let us go. We are leaving." They turned toward the heavy glass doors. They expected me to panic. They expected me to try and physically stop them. Instead, I just stood there and watched them march toward the exit. Kevin grabbed the polished brass handle and shoved. The door did not budge. The magnetic locks held firm. He pulled it. He pushed it again, using his shoulder this time. He rattled the handle violently, panic finally beginning to bleed through his confident facade. "Open this door," he demanded, spinning around to face me. "Open this door right now, or I swear to God I will break it down." I slowly opened the manila folder on the table. I pulled out a glossy, high-definition color photograph and slid it across the glass surface. It was a still frame from Zuri's TikTok draft. It showed all of them in the bathroom, caught in the undeniable act of child abuse. "You are not going anywhere, Kevin," I said quietly. "And neither is that phone call to CPS. Because right now, the only people on their way up to this floor are the officers from Precinct 4, and they are not coming for a corporate meeting. They are coming to arrest you." Kevin let out a sharp bark of laughter, trying to mask the genuine panic bleeding into his eyes. He stepped away from the locked glass door and pointed a trembling finger at me, claiming I was bluffing. He told his wife and my parents to ignore my threats, insisting I was just trying to scare them into dropping their lucrative brand deal. He demanded I unlock the doors immediately so they could leave and report my behavior to the real executives. I did not bother arguing with a man whose professional life had already ended. I simply picked up the sleek silver remote resting next to the manila folder. I did not say a single word. I aimed it at the right side of the room and pressed the top button. The entire right wall of the conference room was constructed from privacy smart glass, which had been frosted completely opaque to block the view of the adjacent executive boardroom. With one click of the remote, the electrical current shifted. The frosted glass instantly turned perfectly transparent. My family froze in their tracks. On the other side of the glass sat 7 highly influential corporate executives. It was the actual board of directors for Lumina Cosmetics, including their chief executive officer and their head of diversity and inclusion. They had been sitting there the entire time with hidden microphones piping the audio from our room directly into theirs. They had heard Kevin arrogantly demand an exit. They had heard Marcus and Brenda boasting just moments before. Before my family could even begin to process the sheer horror of their exposed greed, I pressed the second button on the remote control. The massive projector screen behind me shifted away from the Golden Lotus logo. The screen flickered, and then it began to play the TikTok draft video Zuri had accidentally recorded. The high-definition footage filled the room, towering 10 feet tall and impossible to ignore. The surround sound speakers blasted the chaos of the bathroom assault with terrifying clarity. Everyone in both rooms watched my father, a grown man, press his heavy frame against the bathroom door to trap his own 10-year-old granddaughter inside. They watched my mother violently pin Zuri down against the marble counter, her hands gripping my child's wrists with ruthless bruising force. Then Tasha appeared on the giant screen. The golden child, the aspiring mommy influencer wielding heavy craft scissors like a weapon. The video showed her hacking away at Zuri's beautiful, thick, natural braids with a twisted expression of pure, unadulterated jealousy. The audio from the video rang out, completely destroying whatever was left of my mother's dignified country club image. Brenda's shrill, heartless voice echoed through the speakers, commanding Tasha to cut it all off because Zuri's hair was too beautiful and it was making Chloe cry. She explicitly demanded they cut it to make things fair. Through the clear glass wall, I watched the Lumina Cosmetics executives recoil in absolute physical disgust. The chief executive officer covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with shock. The diversity director shook his head, his face a mask of profound, unfiltered outrage. They were witnessing a vicious, coordinated assault against a black child committed by her own blood relatives all over a beauty campaign. The video ended, but the screen did not go dark. I had edited a second piece of media into the file. The screen transitioned to a stark black background displaying a simple audio waveform. The hidden recording from my parents' living room began to play. Brenda's voice echoed through the room, once again stripped of all her fake, polite suburban charm. The recording broadcasted her vile, unforgivable colorism to the highest corporate level in the city. Everyone heard her explicitly state that Chloe deserved the campaign because she had mixed features and a highly marketable aesthetic. Everyone heard her call her own granddaughter dark-skinned and ethnic. Everyone heard Marcus confidently justify the physical assault because the family desperately needed the $500,000 to pay off Tasha's massive credit card debt. The audio file finished playing. The silence that slammed into the conference room was suffocating. I turned to look at Tasha. She had completely petrified. She was no longer breathing, her chest entirely still beneath her expensive white silk suit. Her eyes were locked onto the transparent glass wall, staring directly at the Lumina executives, who now looked back at her as if she were a literal monster. All the color had drained from her face, leaving her looking like a hollow, empty shell. She had spent a fortune to look like a superstar walking into a boardroom, but right now, she just looked like a criminal caught red-handed. The $500,000 contract she had bragged about was vaporized. Her carefully curated influencer image was annihilated. The executives on the other side of the glass were the exact people she needed to impress, to build her brand, and they had just watched her commit a violent, racially motivated assault against a child to steal a contract. Tasha realized in that exact moment that she would never work in the beauty industry. She would never secure a brand deal. She would be permanently blacklisted from every talent agency in the country the second this video went public. Brenda sank entirely to the floor, her wide-brimmed hat tumbling off her head and rolling sadly across the pristine carpet. She covered her face with her trembling hands, letting out a wretched, humiliated wail. She finally understood that her elite social circle would see this. Her entire church group and country club friends would know exactly what kind of monster she truly was. The facade of the perfect wealthy matriarch was burned to the ground. Marcus stared at the blank projector screen, his jaw hanging slack. The patriarchal authority he had wielded over me for my entire life was completely broken. He was revealed as a small, greedy man who had sold his soul and assaulted a child for a payout that never existed. His reputation was now shattered beyond repair. They were trapped in a glass cage of their own making, forced to marinate in the absolute ruin of their lives. while the executives they had tried to defraud watched their downfall in real time. Kevin violently shattered the heavy silence in the room. He slammed his fist down onto the glass table with a deafening crash, his face contorting from shock into pure, unfiltered rage. The realization that he was being publicly exposed in front of major corporate executives finally broke through his arrogant facade. But instead of showing remorse, his deeply ingrained privilege simply doubled down. He pointed a shaking finger at my face, his voice booming with the entitled fury of a man who is used to crushing anyone beneath him. He screamed that I had just made the biggest mistake of my miserable life. He threatened to unleash the full legal might of the National Investment Bank to completely annihilate my public relations agency. He vowed to sue me for defamation, false imprisonment, and corporate espionage. He loudly declared that his network of powerful executives would ensure I never worked in the city again, and that he was making the call to Child Protective Services the exact second he walked out of this building. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply picked up the thick manila folder resting in front of me. I locked eyes with him, lifted my arm, and threw the folder directly at his chest. The heavy stack of papers smacked against his tailored suit jacket and scattered across the pristine glass table, spilling onto the floor around his expensive leather shoes. Kevin stumbled back a step, looking down at the documents in utter confusion. "You do not have a legal team anymore, Kevin." I stated, my voice echoing with absolute unwavering authority. "You do not have a network, and you certainly do not have a bank to protect you." He stared at me, his chest heaving. He opened his mouth to shout another threat, but the words died in his throat as he finally registered the bold red confidential stamp on the top document lying near his hands. I took a slow, measured step forward. I told him that the pristine audio recording of him threatening to weaponize the child welfare system against a black single mother to cover up a family assault had been delivered directly to the bank's chief executive officer and the ethics board this morning. I explained that in today's corporate climate, a regional director caught on tape committing racialized extortion was not just a liability. It was an immediate radioactive disaster. Kevin's face rapidly drained of all color, transitioning from an angry crimson to a sickly, terrifying shade of gray. His eyes darted frantically across the termination papers scattered before him. I made sure every single detail of his ruin was absolutely clear. I informed him that the ethics board had convened an emergency executive session at 8 o'clock this morning. They reviewed the audio file, authenticated his voice, and voted unanimously. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Kevin Davis was officially terminated from the National Investment Bank with immediate cause for gross misconduct. He reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the termination letter, his eyes frantically scanning the corporate letterhead. I did not let him catch his breath. I delivered the final devastating blow to his beloved financial empire. I told him that because he was fired for severe ethical violations and gross misconduct, his entire severance package was completely voided. Furthermore, every single one of his unvested stock options had been immediately canceled. The massive retirement nest egg he had been counting on to fund his luxurious suburban lifestyle was gone. The country club memberships, the luxury cars, the private school tuitions for Chloe, all of it was entirely wiped out in a matter of seconds. "You thought your corporate title gave you the right to threaten my family?" I said, my voice dropping to a sharp, cutting whisper. "You thought your privilege made you bulletproof. But you handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy you. You are nothing now, Kevin. You are an unemployed, disgraced ex-banker facing a massive public scandal. No financial institution in this country will ever hire you again once this recording leaks to the press." Kevin collapsed into his leather chair, completely paralyzed. The arrogant, untouchable executive had been entirely eradicated. He stared blankly at the termination papers in his hands, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps, as the catastrophic reality of his newfound poverty finally set in. I stepped away from Kevin and turned my attention back to the center of the room. My mother and father were trembling, their eyes darting between the transparent glass wall and my face. The reality of Kevin's total destruction had shattered whatever remaining hope they clung to. They were finally beginning to understand that this was not a corporate negotiation or a family argument. This was an execution. I picked up the final sheet of paper from my manila folder. I held it up for them to see. It was not a contract or a brand deal. It was a printed copy of the state penal code. I looked directly at my sister, then at my parents. I kept my voice entirely flat, devoid of any warmth or hesitation. I told them that forcibly cutting someone's hair against their will is not a family dispute or a bad haircut. It is classified under state law as battery. I took a step closer, my gaze locking onto my father, who had used his immense weight to hold the bathroom door shut. I told him that physically pinning down a 10-year-old child, restraining her while she screams in terror, elevates that crime directly to child abuse. The legal terms hit them like physical blows. Tasha let out a choked, terrified sob, wrapping her arms around her own stomach. She finally understood that she was not just losing a $500,000 cosmetics campaign and her influencer status. She was facing years in a state penitentiary. My mother, Brenda, completely unraveled. The perfectly manicured, status-obsessed matriarch fell entirely to pieces right before my eyes. Her knees buckled beneath her. She dropped to the plush carpet of the boardroom floor, her expensive pastel dress pooling around her. She crawled forward until she was near my feet. She reached out with trembling, desperate hands trying to grab the hem of my trousers. I took a sharp step back, refusing to let her touch me. "Nia, please," my mother wailed, her face contorted in absolute agony. "You cannot do this. You cannot send your own mother to prison. We are family. We share the same blood. We raised you. We made mistakes, but we love you. You have to stop this right now. You have to tell the police it was just a misunderstanding." My father dropped to his knees right beside her. The large, imposing man who had spent my entire life dismissing my worth and praising Tasha was now openly weeping on my boardroom floor. He begged for mercy. He pleaded with me to remember the good times, insisting that they were just trying to do what was best for the family's financial survival. He swore they would never touch Zuri again. He promised they would go to therapy, that they would publicly apologize, that they would do whatever I wanted if I just unlocked the heavy glass doors and let them walk away. They cried the exact same chorus they had used to manipulate me for 32 years. "We are family. Blood is thicker than water. You have to forgive us." They weaponized the concept of family, desperately trying to trigger a lifetime of conditioned obedience. I looked down at the two people who had brought me into this world. I looked at the sister who had tried to destroy my child for a paycheck. I looked at the brother-in-law who had tried to weaponize the child welfare system against me. In the past, their tears would have worked. I would have caved. I would have sacrificed my own peace to maintain their comfort. But the woman they raised to be a punching bag had died the moment they brought a pair of scissors to my daughter's head. I did not yell. I did not hurl insults. I did not explain my pain or demand they understand the depth of their betrayal. Giving them a screaming match would mean giving them a conversation. It would imply that their pleas held any weight, that there was still a sliver of room for negotiation. Instead, I gave them absolute dead silence. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting lightly at my sides. I stared down at them with an expression of profound, chilling emptiness. The silence in the soundproof room became agonizing. It stretched on for 10 seconds, then 20, then 30. The only noise in the expansive suite was the wretched, humiliating sound of my parents groveling and sobbing on the floor. My silence suffocated them. It stripped away their last remaining shreds of dignity. They realized in that cold, quiet abyss that there was absolutely no empathy left to mine. There was no secret reservoir of daughterly guilt they could tap into. The bridge was not just burned, it was entirely obliterated. I was looking at them not as family members, but as criminals waiting for their transport. The silence was finally broken, not by a word, but by a sound cutting through the thick, reinforced glass of the skyscraper. It started as a distant, high-pitched wail echoing up from the downtown Atlanta streets. Within seconds, the noise amplified, multiplying as several more sirens joined the chorus. The piercing, unmistakable shriek of police cruisers completely enveloped the building. The flashing red and blue lights began to reflect faintly against the surrounding glass towers, casting an eerie, rhythmic glow into the boardroom. Kevin staggered backward, bumping hard against the heavy mahogany table. The arrogant bank director looked like a trapped animal. He darted his eyes toward the door, then toward the windows, desperately searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. Tasha let out a blood-curdling scream, grabbing her perfectly styled hair with trembling hands. Her pristine white silk suit was now a stark contrast to the absolute horror twisting her features. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic pleading, but I kept my posture completely rigid and my expression carved from stone. My father, Marcus, scrambled to his feet, trying to pull my mother up from the carpet, but Brenda's legs completely gave out. She collapsed into a heap of expensive pastel fabric, gasping for air, as a full-blown panic attack seized her chest. They were no longer the proud, affluent suburbanites who had casually orchestrated the assault of my child. They were terrified criminals listening to the undeniable sound of their own impending ruin. Before the chaos could escalate any further, the heavy magnetic locks on the boardroom doors disengaged with a loud definitive clack. The thick glass doors burst open. Valerie stepped swiftly into the room, bypassing my family entirely. She walked straight to the corner where my 10-year-old niece Chloe was sitting frozen in her chair. Valerie offered the terrified girl a warm, comforting smile, gently taking her hand. She smoothly escorted Chloe out of the room and down the hall, shielding the innocent child from the brutal reality of what was about to happen to her parents and grandparents. I had ensured Chloe would be kept safe in a designated playroom with a child advocate I had hired specifically for this moment. I protect children. I do not traumatize them. The second Valerie cleared the doorway, 4 uniformed officers from Precinct 4 marched into the executive boardroom. They moved with swift, tactical precision. The heavy thud of their combat boots against the plush corporate carpet felt like the ultimate gavel striking down on my family's legacy. "Nobody move," the lead officer commanded, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. "Keep your hands exactly where we can see them." Tasha completely lost her mind. She shrieked, backing away until she hit the glass wall separating us from the Lumina Cosmetics board of directors. She pressed her hands against the transparent barrier, looking right at the corporate executives who were watching the entire scene unfold with grim fascination. She begged them for help, screaming that she was a famous influencer, that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, that she was supposed to sign a $500,000 contract today. The executives did not flinch. The chief executive officer simply crossed her arms, staring at Tasha with absolute, unadulterated disgust. Tasha was begging for salvation from the very people she had tried to defraud through an act of violent racism. 2 officers flanked Tasha immediately. They grabbed her wrists, pulling her arms forcefully behind her back. She thrashed and wailed, screaming about how the cold metal of the handcuffs was ruining her expensive silk suit, completely oblivious to the fact that her freedom was officially gone. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed loudly in the room. Kevin tried to leverage his dying privilege one last time. He puffed out his chest, stepping toward the lead officer with a fake air of authority. He demanded the officers stop immediately, loudly declaring his name and stating that he was a highly respected regional bank director who played golf with the chief of police. He insisted they were arresting the wrong people and demanded they arrest me instead. The lead officer did not even blink. He grabbed Kevin by the shoulder, spun him around, and slammed him face first onto the polished mahogany table. The impact sent a shockwave through the room. The officer swiftly pulled Kevin's arms behind his back, snapping the handcuffs onto his wrists. The officer leaned down, his voice dangerously low, informing Kevin that the police chief did not play golf with men wanted for felony extortion and accessory to child abuse. Kevin's face pressed against the cold glass surface, his arrogant facade totally obliterated. He was reduced to a weeping, hyperventilating mess, realizing his corporate title meant absolutely nothing in the face of hard, undeniable evidence. Marcus and Brenda did not fight back. The fight had been entirely drained out of them. They stood trembling in the center of the room, looking like 2 frail, pathetic strangers. An officer approached my father, reading him his Miranda rights as he clamped the steel cuffs around his wrists. Marcus hung his head, refusing to look at me, the shame of his public exposure finally breaking his lifelong pride. My mother wept uncontrollably as the female officer secured her hands behind her back. The woman who had spent 32 years obsessing over her image, who had judged everyone by their social standing, was now doing a perp walk in front of a room full of elite corporate leaders. Her expensive, wide-brimmed hat lay crushed on the floor. Her makeup was smeared across her face in dark, ugly streaks. She looked exactly like the ugly, broken person she had always been on the inside. "You have the right to remain silent," the lead officer recited, his voice echoing over my family's chaotic sobbing. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I stood silently at the head of the table, watching the officers physically march my family toward the exit. They dragged Tasha out first. She kicked and screamed the entire way, her cries of victimhood bouncing off the walls of the executive corridor. Kevin was hauled out next, stumbling over his own expensive shoes, his head hanging in absolute defeat. Marcus and Brenda followed, a pathetic, weeping pair of enablers who had finally run out of people to manipulate. As they reached the doorway, Brenda stopped. She turned her head, looking back at me over her shoulder. Her eyes were red and swollen, filled with a desperate, pleading agony. She opened her mouth to say something, perhaps to beg for mercy one final time, or perhaps to hurl one last curse at the daughter who had finally outsmarted her. I did not give her the chance. I stared right back at her, my posture perfectly straight, my expression an unreadable mask of absolute power. I raised my hand and gave her a slow, dismissive wave goodbye. The officer nudged her forward, and she disappeared into the hallway. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind them, the magnetic locks engaging with that same satisfying, definitive click. The screaming faded as the elevator doors closed, taking them down to the lobby, where the rest of the precinct was waiting to parade them out the front doors in broad daylight. The silence returned to the boardroom. It was no longer heavy or suffocating. It was light, clean, and incredibly peaceful. I turned to look through the transparent glass wall. The Lumina Cosmetics executives were still standing there. The chief executive officer gave me a slow, respectful nod of absolute approval. I had not just protected my daughter. I had protected their brand from a catastrophic liability, and I had done it with flawless, ruthless precision. I picked up my phone from the table, smoothed the lapels of my charcoal blazer, and walked out of the conference room. The air in the corridor felt different now. The toxic, suffocating presence of my biological family had been completely eradicated from my life. I had burned their empire to ash, and from the smoke I was walking away completely untouched. The heavy steel doors of the downtown precinct slid shut behind me, completely severing the warm morning sunlight from the grim, sterile reality of the holding center. The air inside smelled of industrial bleach, stale coffee, and the undeniable scent of desperation. It was a massive departure from the pristine, lavender-infused sanctuary of my home, or the mahogany-lined corridors of my executive suite. I walked toward the visitor processing desk, my heels clicking methodically against the scuffed linoleum floor. I wore a perfectly tailored emerald green suit, choosing a color that projected calm, unyielding authority. I was not there as a grieving daughter or a betrayed sister. I was there as the architect of their consequences. The desk sergeant reviewed my identification and led me down a narrow, windowless hallway illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. The walls were painted a dull, institutional gray that seemed to absorb any lingering trace of hope. We stopped in front of a reinforced glass partition. On the other side sat a row of metal chairs bolted directly to the concrete floor. A heavy metal door opened on the opposite side of the glass. A corrections officer escorted Tasha into the visitation booth. If I had not known who I was waiting to see, I might not have recognized the woman shuffling toward the glass. The glamorous, arrogant influencer who had strutted into my boardroom yesterday was completely gone. Tasha was drowning inside an oversized, scratchy Orange County jumpsuit. Her face was entirely devoid of makeup, revealing the deep, exhausted bags under her eyes and the pale, splotchy unevenness of her skin. The luxurious, $1,000 custom wig she had worn to the contract signing had been confiscated during booking. Her natural hair was matted and pressed flat against her scalp. She looked incredibly small, fragile, and utterly pathetic. Tasha sat down heavily on the metal stool. She picked up the black plastic telephone receiver with trembling hands. I sat across from her and picked up my own receiver, my posture perfectly straight. Tasha sobbed into the phone. The sound was distorted through the cheap plastic speaker, but the raw panic was unmistakable. You have to get me out of here. Please. It is freezing. The food is disgusting. There are actual criminals in here. You have to call the district attorney. You have to drop the charges. I will do anything. I will go to rehab. I will make a public apology video. Just please do not let them keep me here. I looked at her, my expression completely blank. She still viewed the world through the lens of social media. She thought a public apology video could erase a felony child abuse charge. She thought her discomfort in a county jail cell somehow outweighed the trauma she had inflicted on a 10-year-old child. Before I could even formulate a response, the heavy door on Tasha's side opened again. My mother and father were escorted into the booth by another officer. The county did not usually allow group visitations, but my high-powered legal team had pulled a few strings to arrange this specific meeting. I wanted to look all of them in the eye at the exact same time. Brenda collapsed onto the stool next to Tasha. The country club matriarch had completely evaporated. Her designer pastel dress had been replaced by the same hideous orange jumpsuit. Her perfectly styled hair was a tangled, chaotic mess. Marcus stood behind them, his broad shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. The commanding patriarchal authority he had weaponized his entire life was completely broken. He looked like a tired, terrified old man. Brenda snatched the secondary receiver from the wall mount. Nia, my mother, wailed, her voice cracking with pure desperation. You made your point. You won. You humiliated us in front of the entire city. Now please, you have to stop this. Your father spent the night in a holding cell with violent offenders. Kevin is being transferred to a maximum security facility because he tried to fight a police officer during booking. Chloe is in the custody of Child Protective Services because Kevin's parents refused to take her. You are destroying this family. You have to call the police and tell them you made a mistake. I sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair listening to the frantic, breathless pleas pouring through the receiver. They were begging for their lives. They were offering hollow apologies, promising they would change, swearing they would never cross me again. They tried to use Chloe as a weapon, hoping my empathy for my niece would override my demand for justice. They still did not understand. They still thought they could manipulate my emotions. They thought the biological tie between us gave them a permanent get-out-of-jail-free card. I waited until they had completely exhausted themselves. I waited until their sobs dissolved into pathetic, ragged gasps for air. I wanted the silence between us to be absolute. I wanted my words to land with the devastating precision of a sniper round. I leaned forward, bringing my face closer to the reinforced glass. I looked directly into my mother's tear-streaked, terrified eyes. Then I shifted my gaze to Tasha, and finally to my father. You are asking me to drop the charges. I said, my voice perfectly level, radiating a cold, unyielding calm. You are asking me to disrupt the legal system because you are uncomfortable. You want me to save you from the consequences of your own vicious, calculated cruelty. I paused, letting the weight of my impending rejection settle over them. I thought about the bathroom in Tasha's mansion. I thought about my father throwing his heavy frame against the door to lock me out. I thought about my mother violently pinning my daughter's wrists to the cold marble counter. I thought about the wicked, triumphant sneer on Tasha's face as she hacked away at Zuri's beautiful natural hair. I thought about the agonizing sobs of my child begging the people who were supposed to love her to stop hurting her. I smiled. It was not a smile of joy or warmth. It was the absolute chilling smile of an executioner pulling the lever. I looked at my mother and repeated the exact same words she had weaponized against me just 48 hours ago. You guys were right, I said smoothly, letting each syllable hang in the stale air of the visitation booth. There is absolutely no need to make a scene. Brenda's eyes widened in sudden horrifying recognition. She remembered the words. She remembered standing over my weeping daughter and telling me to get over it. It is just prison, I continued, my voice dripping with lethal, mocking reassurance. Do not be so overly sensitive. You will serve your time and you will get out eventually. Time flies when you are learning a lesson. Tasha let out a guttural, agonizing scream. She slammed her hands against the reinforced glass, begging and pleading, promising she would give me anything I wanted. Brenda dropped the phone receiver, letting it dangle by its metal cord as she buried her face in her hands and wept with total crushing despair. Marcus just stood there staring at me through the glass, his eyes completely hollow as he realized his entire life was officially over. I gently placed the black plastic receiver back onto the wall mount. The sharp click cut off their frantic begging voices entirely. I stood up from the metal chair. I smoothed the lapels of my emerald green suit with slow, deliberate precision. I did not offer them a second glance. I did not look back to watch them crumble into the wreckage of their own making. I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. The heavy steel doors of the visitation center slid open, welcoming me back into the bright, beautiful morning sunlight. The air outside tasted crisp and incredibly sweet. I walked across the parking lot toward my car, leaving my former family trapped in the cold, windowless concrete cage they had built for themselves. They had tried to cut my daughter down to make themselves feel tall. They had tried to extinguish her light to hide their own darkness. But they had failed. They had lost everything, and I had protected the only family that actually mattered. The war was officially over, and the victory was absolute. The drive from the downtown precinct back to my house felt like gliding through an entirely new reality. The oppressive weight I had carried on my shoulders for over 3 decades was gone, left behind in that cold, windowless visitation booth. The invisible chains of familial obligation, the relentless pressure to shrink myself, the constant fear of my daughter being subjected to the same emotional abuse I had endured, it had all been completely eradicated. I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, listening to the absolute beautiful quiet of a life finally under my own control. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The house was bathed in the warm, golden light of the late afternoon sun. It smelled of fresh lavender and the sweet almond oil Miss Denise had used at the salon. This was my sanctuary, a fortress built entirely on my own merit, completely impenetrable to the toxic chaos my parents and sister had tried to infect it with. I placed my keys on the console table and walked into the living room, taking a deep cleansing breath of the peaceful air. The multi-million-dollar contracts, the corporate maneuvers, the legal warfare, all of it faded into the background. The only thing that mattered now was the absolute safety and happiness of the child who lived within these walls. I had burned down an entire empire of lies just to protect her, and standing in the warmth of our living room, I knew I would do it 1,000 times over. The sound of quick, excited footsteps padding rapidly down the hallway broke the silence. Zuri burst into the living room like a brilliant, unstoppable burst of sunlight. She was wearing her favorite bright yellow sundress, but it was not the dress that caught my attention. It was her crown. Miss Denise's masterful work was on full display. The flawless waist-length box braids swung beautifully around her shoulders. At the very ends of the braids, clear crystal and bright golden beads clicked together, creating a soft melodic chiming sound with every movement she made. She did not look like the traumatized weeping child who had been pinned against a marble sink days ago. She looked radiant. She looked fiercely proud. She spun around in the center of the living room, deliberately making the braids flare out around her just to hear the beads clink. Her smile was wide, unfiltered, and entirely secure. "Look, Mom!" Zuri beamed, catching a handful of her braids and holding them up to the sunlight pouring through the large bay windows. Miss Denise said the gold beads match my skin perfectly. She said I look like actual royalty. "You do not just look like royalty, baby," I said, dropping to my knees right there on the plush living room rug. "You are royalty. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Zuri let go of her braids and ran directly toward me. She threw her arms around my neck, burying her face into my shoulder. The impact was strong, joyful, and completely devoid of fear. I wrapped my arms around her small frame, holding her tightly against my chest. I buried my face in her fresh, beautifully styled hair, inhaling the soothing scent of the protective oils. I felt the steady, calm rhythm of her heartbeat against mine. The panic that had seized my chest in Tasha's bathroom was permanently replaced by an overwhelming fierce tidal wave of maternal victory. I had successfully shielded my daughter from the generational trauma that was supposed to break her. The cycle was officially dead. As I held my daughter in my arms, the atmosphere in the room felt as though it was physically expanding. The perspective seemed to pull back slowly, moving gradually away from us, capturing the entire scope of the warm, sunlit living room. The sleek modern furniture, the vibrant contemporary artwork on the walls, the framed photographs of just the two of us smiling on various vacations, it all framed the perfect, impenetrable safe haven I had built. I slowly lifted my chin from Zuri's shoulder. I kept my arms wrapped securely around my daughter, but I shifted my gaze forward. I looked straight ahead, piercing directly through the invisible fourth wall, locking my eyes dead center onto the lens. My expression was no longer the mask of a cold, calculating corporate crisis manager. It was the calm, sovereign look of a woman who had fought a war for her child's soul and emerged completely victorious. A slow, knowing, and absolutely unapologetic smile spread across my face. Family is not defined by the people who happen to share your bloodline, I said, my voice rich, steady, and vibrating with absolute conviction. Family is defined by the people who would never even dream of picking up a pair of scissors to cut off your wings. I tilted my head just slightly, the smile sharpening into something lethal and perfectly content. And if they ever dare to try, I continued enunciating every single syllable with chilling precision. You make absolutely certain that you are the one holding their final sentence in your hands. The golden sunlight reflecting off Zuri's beads gave one last brilliant flash. The screen cut abruptly to pitch black,